We know exactly how they get their things here, how they get the drugs here, fentanyl, cocaine.
At 4:11 a.m., a nondescript warehouse in Ohio lay silent in the dark until the glare of tactical headlights cut through the night and teams of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, U.S. Immigration, and Customs Enforcement and Drug Enforcement Administration stormed in like a blade slicing into stealthy enterprise. As investigators zoomed in on the labels lining the shelves, their breath caught. Containers marked lab binder and cleaning powder matched the chemical codes known since 2022 to be used as precursors to fentanyl. What appeared to be a mere shipping depot revealed itself as a critical node in a vast transnational network. United States law enforcement recognized that this was not a local stash. It was a hub of a Chinese-operated chemical cartel, disguised as legitimate exporters. For over 3 years, under the codename Operation Box Cutter, U.S. authorities traced this hidden industrial complex from its origins overseas to its domestic footprint in Ohio. They followed shipments, payments in cryptocurrency, and encrypted digital ledgers. And just when it seemed the warehouse was the center of the storm, the greatest surprise emerged not from chemicals or presses, but from the silent hum of money moving from Ohio to China each night. That discovery, long hidden, changes the story entirely. If you want to join us as we cut through the shadows of this murky war on synthetic drugs, hit subscribe to the Military Power channel, because the next move in this battle could change everything. In early 2022, a routine shipment at the port of Cincinnati seemed innocent enough. Crates of what were labeled as laboratory binder and cleaning powder destined for the United States. At first glance, U.S. Customs officials believed they were dealing with typical lab supply imports. But when analysts noticed the exact same typo code repeating on 4 separate shipments from 3 different Chinese cities, alarm bells rang. The consistency of the labeling error triggered deeper scrutiny, and investigators soon discovered that these crates were not benign lab supplies at all, but chemical precursors for the synthetic opioid fentanyl, cleverly disguised behind legal-sounding packaging. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that this case was unlike previous crackdowns on street-level drug dealers. Instead, U.S. agencies had stumbled upon an industrial-scale supply chain operating across continents. Chinese chemical exporters masquerading as legitimate businesses, American distributors receiving shipments, and complex payment structures masking the true nature of the trade. One key link emerged in Ohio, where investigators uncovered 2 branches operating in parallel. One handling the arrival and distribution of chemical shipments, the other managing cryptocurrency payments in a hidden server network. The shift in U.S. strategy became evident. This was not just intercepting cocaine or heroin crossing the border, but dismantling the pipeline of materials used to make lethal opioids. That realization propelled the launch of what federal officials termed Operation Box Cutter, an effort aimed at severing the connection between China-based chemical firms and U.S. overdose deaths. Yet the most unexpected revelation did not come from the crates themselves. It came from the financial trail. Agents discovered cryptocurrency wallets tracing back to the Ohio branch, funneling payments across borders to Chinese firms. The digital ledger exposed a dark web of money beneath what appeared to be legitimate trade. With that discovery, the operation transformed. The focus shifted from shipments to the invisible currency that powered the trade. In other words, the warehouse in Ohio was only the front door. What lay behind it was a global machine of production, logistics, and finance. In a seemingly ordinary garage in Dayton, Ohio, investigators from the Federal Bureau of Investigation uncovered what looked like a small-time IT setup. But behind a plain residential door, they found far more than servers and cables. They discovered encrypted machines humming around the clock, cold storage wallets for cryptocurrency, and a sophisticated software suite designed to launder money. The garage was innocuous on its face, yet inside it was one of the central nodes of a transnational chemical cartel that had been hidden in plain sight. The digital trail revealed a chilling method. Payments from the U.S. flowed to China, but not through large transfers. Instead, hundreds of small transactions, each under $600, were sent monthly to avoid detection by financial surveillance systems. The arrangement allowed millions of dollars to move quietly, stealthily. Two US-based operatives emerged as key anchors in this scheme. Americans who handled the domestic side of the operation, receiving funds, forwarding payments, and coordinating shipments for Chinese companies in Shanghai, Wuhan, and Shenzhen. According to the U.S. Department of Justice press release issued September 3, 2025, one defendant in Ohio and his co-conspirators transferred more than $60,000 in cryptocurrency to Chinese foreign nationals since 2022. Meanwhile, on the Chinese side of the ledger, shipments of precursor chemicals reached nearly 18 tons between 2023 and 2025, disguised as legitimate lab supplies. The combination of small-value crypto transfers and the creative mislabeling of chemical cargo enabled what experts now call a fentanyl factory model rather than a street-level dealer operation. Under that model, the raw materials arrive in the U.S., then domestic actors mix the substances, press them into pills, and distribute them across the country, thereby minimizing cross-border risk and maximizing profit. This method, discovered during the operation codenamed Operation Box Cutter, marks a stark shift in U.S. counter-drug strategy. Federal agents analyzed the data captured in the garage servers and found client lists, shipment logs, and encrypted wallet addresses connected to the Chinese exporters. What appeared first as an isolated money laundering node grew into a sprawling system of coordination. Payment channels in Ohio, warehousing in Ohio, shipment ports in China, and product delivery pipelines into the U.S. That web allowed the cartel-style enterprise to operate at a scale previously reserved for traditional narcotics like cocaine or heroin, but with the added stealth of legitimate-looking trade and digital crypto flows. As investigators penetrated deeper, they uncovered the real twist, a named contact on the records tied directly to a Mexican cartel, long known for distributing synthetic opioids in the United States. The implication was clear. This scheme linked Chinese chemical firms, American domestic logistics, and Mexican trafficking networks into one unified supply stream. Rather than merely stopping street dealers, U.S. enforcement agencies were now dismantling entire supply chains, starting with chemicals through crypto finance to the final pill in an American city. The U.S. discovered that attacking traffickers at the street level no longer suffices. The key is to target the production and financing. The Dayton garage, with its cold wallets and encryption, became the physical manifestation of that insight. The slow trickle of $600-level crypto payments disguised a flood of toxic materials engineered to kill. And the presence of Mexican cartel links meant that the same network that supplied the pill makers also had a global footprint of distribution. The gravity of the operation cannot be overstated. According to the Department of Justice, the indicted Chinese companies and their U.S. collaborators knowingly and openly marketed, delivered, and exported to the United States controlled substances and other compounds that they knew would be used by domestic drug dealers to increase the yield and potency of fentanyl distributed in this country. This admission reframes the entire enterprise. One is not dealing with isolated mislabelings or small shipments, but a full-scale industrial pipeline built to exploit the worst drug epidemic in U.S. history. And yet, despite the high stakes, the tactic was deceptively low profile. A garage in Ohio, crypto wallets hidden behind genuine-looking company invoices, shipments labeled as benign lab supplies. The design was simple. It just worked at a global scale. For the U.S., the decision to treat this like a military-style supply chain disruption rather than a narcotics raid was a turning point. In short, the Ohio server hub represents a microcosm of the new battleground. Chemicals, code, crypto, and cartels, all interconnected. What started as a garage in Dayton turned into the nerve center of an industrialized drug pipeline. The question now becomes, If this is one hub, how many more exist unseen? And how many lives hang in the balance until they are found? When investigators extracted the data from the Dayton garage and began reconstructing the digital money trail, a single pattern kept surfacing. The individuals in Ohio who were forwarding payments to China were not acting independently. Every transaction they sent was triggered by instructions from one broker account, a middleman positioned between the U.S. operators and the chemical exporters overseas. As analysts compared this identity with records from earlier narcotics financing inquiries, they realized they had encountered the same name in cases that had tracked money moving into Mexican trafficking networks, including channels long associated with the Sinaloa cartel. Reports summarizing the box cutter case later confirmed that several precursor suppliers had promoted their chemicals for use in Sinaloa-controlled laboratories. That meant the garage in Ohio was not just pushing cryptocurrency across borders, it was quietly fueling one of the most powerful drug groups on the planet. On the opposite end of the pipeline were the Chinese chemical companies. According to the Justice Department, a federal grand jury charged 22 Chinese nationals, along with 4 China-based pharmaceutical and chemical companies, as well as 3 U.S. citizens, in an international conspiracy involving drug trafficking and money laundering tied to fentanyl precursors. Prosecutors stated that these businesses advertised and shipped synthetic compounds that they knew were suitable for manufacturing fentanyl and similar opioids, all while presenting themselves as standard laboratory supply exporters. The Ohio operation formed the central hinge that connected those exporters to the American market. Transaction records and shipping manifests revealed a stream of small cryptocurrency payments, each intentionally structured under the reporting threshold, flowing from U.S. wallets into accounts controlled by companies in Shanghai, Wuhan, and Shenzhen. Meanwhile, mislabeled containers were dispatched back into the United States under the guise of routine lab shipments. That back-and-forth movement reflected a broader trend U.S. authorities have highlighted for years: Chinese chemical producers using legitimate-looking documentation and online storefronts to ship precursors into foreign markets, while digital transactions and intermediaries obscure their role. The final corner of the triangle sat to the south. Outside the box cutter investigation, Justice Department filings and financial crime studies have shown how Sinaloa cartel operatives routinely clean tens of millions of dollars in drug proceeds through Chinese underground banking networks, trade-based laundering systems, and cryptocurrency exchanges. In one major 2024 case, associates of Sinaloa in Los Angeles were charged with handling more than $50 million using a combination of bulk cash, crypto purchases, and covert transfer channels. In another case, the U.S. Treasury sanctioned several Mexican financial entities for enabling payments to China that allowed both the Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation cartels to buy the chemicals they relied on. And federal agents underscored the scale of this link when they intercepted more than 1,000 barrels of methamphetamine precursor shipped from Shanghai to Mexico, confirming that large cartels were already leaning on Chinese suppliers at industrial levels. Viewed through this wider pattern, the Ohio discovery no longer resembled a small cyber laundering hub. It appeared to be the missing middle segment of a unified system. On one end, the Chinese companies manufactured and exported the precursors. In the center, the Ohio operations managed the incoming goods, organized customs paperwork, and sent cryptocurrency back in small increments that blended into normal financial traffic. At the other end, intermediaries tied to Mexican cartels directed how the chemicals were distributed inside the United States, supplying pill press operations capable of producing tablets on a massive scale. Each element held just enough distance to maintain deniability, yet all three functioned as parts of one coordinated machine. For American investigators, this exposed a new phase of fentanyl trafficking. Instead of smugglers hiding finished drugs at border crossings, they were now tracking a supply chain that operated with the precision of a multinational logistics network. The chemicals appeared legitimate on paper, the payments were disguised as harmless microtransactions, and the production phase had been repositioned within U.S. borders, making it far less visible to the traditional enforcement. This is why identifying the broker tied to cartel operations marked a decisive turning point. With that connection confirmed, agents could finally see the entire structure. Chinese exporters at the top, Ohio-based receivers, and crypto handlers in the middle, and cartel distribution networks at the base. It was a single mechanism with multiple faces. And as one official later emphasized, the FBI no longer intended to chase individual traffickers. The mission was to cripple the supply chain itself. That realization shaped the strategy that guided Operation Box Cutter. Striking one link would not be enough. To dismantle the system, they would need to take down every part of the triangle in a single coordinated blow. On a crisp autumn morning, simultaneous raids erupted in 3 U.S. cities: Ohio, New York, and Atlanta. Teams from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Drug Enforcement Administration converged in coordinated motion, timing their entries to strike at once. In Ohio, agents wielded battering rams and stormed through warehouse doors. Inside, technicians instigated machines to scrutinize pill presses, while financial investigators grabbed cold storage crypto wallets and encrypted servers. The operation's codename, Box Cutter, was no metaphor. It reflected how law enforcement intended to slice through the supply chain. When the indictments were unsealed, the results were staggering. 29 defendants, including 22 Chinese nationals, 4 China-based chemical companies, and 3 U.S. citizens, were charged with participating in international drug trafficking and money laundering conspiracies. The assets frozen exceeded $3.4 million US dollars, and one single seizure, 139 kilograms of fentanyl powder, was described as being enough to kill 70 million Americans. From the moment the raids launched, the full scale of the operation became clear. Chemical shipments, disguised as legitimate lab supplies, crypto payment systems hidden behind innocuous U.S. branches, and pill-pressing equipment ready to flood American streets. Warehouse doors were smashed, pills presses seized, servers confiscated, every action a key blow delivered at a defined target in the network. The Washington-based press release from the Justice Department noted that the Chinese companies indicted intentionally and openly marketed, delivered, and exported to the United States controlled substances and other compounds that they knew would be used by domestic drug dealers to increase the yield and potency of fentanyl distributed in this country. What made the operation unusual was not simply the arrests or the seizures, but the timing and simultaneity of the raids. By hitting the logistics nodes in Ohio and simultaneously disrupting financial flows and overseas exporters, U.S. law enforcement forced the network to collapse inward. From New York to Atlanta to Ohio, the strategy resembled a military strike rather than a law enforcement sweep. It was designed to expose the whole system at once. And then came the twist. When investigators examined the servers and data contained within the raid sites, they discovered transaction logs dating back to 2018, years before the official start of the investigation. These old dated logs proved that the cartel-linked supply chain had been operating beneath surface attention for far longer than anticipated. Suddenly the story changed from recent theft of chemical shipments to hidden industrial network active for years. The inclusion of multi-year cloud-based logs gave prosecutors an unprecedented window into how the network masked its activity and adapted to enforcement pressures. For the U.S., the meaning was clear. This was no longer about chasing individual dealers or pill press factories. The logic had shifted to defeating the entire infrastructure: exporters, logistics, finances, and domestic facilitation. As one senior FBI official put it during the press conference, "We're done playing whack-a-mole." Operation Box Cutter marked the beginning of that new approach. As the dust settled, law enforcement had placed international warrants, froze assets, intercepted chemicals, and displaced a global distribution network. The seizure of 139 kilograms of fentanyl alone represented a moment of truth, enough to kill millions. The synchronized raids had disrupted not just shipments, but the financial lifelines and manufacturing routes of the network. In doing so, the US took bold steps to prevent the next wave of synthetic opioid devastation. In short, the coordinated raids under Operation Boxcutter transformed the playing field. Instead of reacting to finished drugs on the street, US agencies proactively severed the supply chain at its core. The scale, simultaneity, and precision of the operation proved that this battle was being fought not only on the streets, but in labs, in crypto networks, and across continents. In a nondescript server room tucked away behind a modest doorway, Federal Bureau of Investigation agents discovered encrypted data files stretching back 7 years, client lists, shipment logs, internal codes used by Chinese chemical firms, and transport routes mapped with precision. Those records didn't just reflect current activity, they matched cargo manifests tied to precursor chemicals that had quietly entered US ports years earlier. The implication was stark. The chemical supply network had operated deeper and longer than previously understood. Inside those systems, the investigators found technical documentation for a new cutting method. By using only 1% of certain precursors, traffickers could manufacture fentanyl pills with potency 10 times higher than conventional formulas. The Justice Department's indictment notes that the Chinese companies openly marketed and shipped synthetic chemicals that they knew could be used to make fentanyl and related opioids. US officials began to refer to the structure not simply as drug trafficking, but as an industrial-scale operation of poisoning. Chemicals produced and transported, finances laundered, manufacturing hidden in plain sight. From Washington's perspective, this was a game changer. The shift from chasing mid-level dealers to dismantling multinational supply chains meant the US was fighting a war of logistics rather than an isolated criminal case. Chinese exporters, Ohio-based crypto operatives, and Mexico-linked distribution networks formed one continuous system. Meanwhile, the Chinese government responded that the US was politicizing the drug problem, while US officials stressed that their focus was on private companies and syndicates, not an entire nation. The tension this revealed was more than diplomatic. It illuminated a new front where trade policy, cybersecurity, and law enforcement intersected. As one internal memo put it, the discovery of multi-year logs meant that enforcement efforts were always several steps behind a system already embedded and evolving. In the words of one senior official, the laboratory-style production network represented industrialized poisoning rather than street-level dealing. And then came the question that echoed in briefing rooms. If this was a single large network operating across continents and years, how many others were doing the same thing entirely unseen? Was this ring simply unique? Or was it a replicated model running in multiple regions? With the server archive now exposed, US authorities realized they were only scratching the surface. This chapter marked the moment when the investigation moved from reactive to proactive. No longer waiting for pills to show up in local hospitals or overdose statistics to spike, American agencies began tracing the supply chain from chemical vats in China through crypto wallets in Ohio to trafficking rings across the country. What began as a server raid became a snapshot of a war quietly raging inside global trade. When federal agents finally shut down the network at the center of Operation Boxcutter, the message was unmistakable. This was more than a drug raid. It was a strategic shift in how the United States confronts synthetic opioid threats. Instead of chasing street-level dealers, investigators went after the source, the producers, the transport channels, and the financial systems that allowed an industrial pipeline to operate in silence. According to the Justice Department, the 139 kilograms of fentanyl powder seized during the raids represented enough material to produce millions of lethal doses. Yet even that staggering volume was only the surface of a much larger machine. Behind it lay a global supply chain, camouflaged behind legitimate-looking companies, encrypted servers, and cryptocurrency transfers designed to disappear into the noise of ordinary commerce. From the US perspective, this operation became proof of a hard reality. If traffickers treat the supply chain as a weapon, then the only way to fight back is to cut the weapon at its origin. That is why Box Cutter mattered. It showed that a quiet garage in Ohio, a warehouse mislabeled as a lab supplier, or a cluster of crypto wallets could be more dangerous than any street corner. And it showed how easily a criminal network can hide inside international trade for years before anyone notices. So the final question is the one investigators still ask today. If one network could hide this well, under the facade of legitimate business, how many others are out there operating in the dark, untouched, and unseen? If you have a view on whether the US should keep striking at the source or tighten the borders instead, tell us in the comments. And make sure to subscribe to Military Power so you never miss the next operation uncovered.